Hi, I'm Dan Spurgeon, and I'm from Washington, Illinois, just outside of Peoria, and that's actually where I grew up, is Washington, Illinois. So I didn't move too far from where I found my career at Caterpillar. So there's historically there's several facilities for Caterpillar, in the area. Now some of them with some of the reorganizations and things that's changed over the years, but the East Peoria is historically a big facility that when Caterpillar was first formed, right, and other facilities around the area. I work at the Technical Center out in Mossville, just north of Peoria, is my facility where I'm at. And our headquarters used to be in Peoria also for the whole company. My dad went to Bradley University there in Peoria. I wanted to follow his footsteps, and he's a contractor in excavation. And I kind of, as a kid growing up, I looked up to my dad, and I kind of thought that's what I wanted to do. Well, I started out in school going to as a civil engineering, but before I even got to Bradley, I changed to electrical engineering because that seemed to be the hot topic back when I went to school. That's when personal computers were coming out and whatever. And that lasted about a year and a half or so at college, and I realized this wasn't for me, which just goes to show, I shouldn't have gone with something just because that seemed like that's where everything was headed. I should have gone with where I felt my passion was at, right? I mean, you do have to marry up your passion to something that's practical, that you can make a career out of, right? You got to be smart about it and get some guidance towards that. But mechanical engineering is where I landed, and being at school, they kind of took me through some, not courses, but some self-evaluation tools that they had, and it kind of led me down a path that not even civil would have still been a good choice for me, is where my interest lied. But mechanical seemed to be stronger for me, where my interest lied. So that's why I chose that, and that's where I landed. And that's where I graduated at Bradley University. And I guess you're asking me all about my education. So I'm getting ready to graduate thinking, okay, I'm going to get this career going. And one of my professors pulls me aside, and it's like, you really ought to consider getting a master's degree. That's the thing. He even told me, more so than getting his doctorate degree, his master's degree is really the one that really, really made him, really appreciate, be more understanding of the science and the understanding of the engineering curriculum. And so I don't know, he convinced me, so I stuck around and got my master's degree also from Bradley University. And so that was an interesting endeavor, doing that. You picked a path, and I don't know what they are nowadays because I'm 30 plus years removed, and so things are a little different. But back when I went to school, you either went down more of a, solid mechanics design side of things, or you went down a path more of thermal sciences, fluid mechanics and stuff, and that's the path that I took. So all the courses that I took in graduate school, with a few exceptions, were all fluid sciences, thermodynamics based. Took an advanced air conditioning course, just as an example. In fact, that was the only course at Bradley that I could have taken that was very dedicated towards air conditioning. It was more commercial side, mind you. I don't know of anything out there that's more for the kind of stuff that we do with the mobile. But so that was an exposure to me. Thermodynamics also exposed me to air conditioning. There's parts of that where you learn the air conditioning cycle, the refrigeration cycle in thermodynamics. You learn psychrometrics in thermodynamics. That's where you learn about the air, the humidity, the relationships between the humidity, wet bulb, dry bulb. You could do your calculations on heat transfer and stuff just looking at the air side of the system, or you can look at the refrigerant side of the system and calculate all your energy balances and things. So that, thermodynamics taught me both of those things, and that was very interesting. So I don't know if that was a harbinger of things to come in my life, but that certainly was an area that I excelled at and I enjoyed a lot. I wish I never got a picture of it, but the old air conditioner we had at our home for years, I just finally got it replaced last spring. It was conking out finally. The damn thing was 1973, 1975, whenever the house was built. That's how old this thing. It was a York. and it looked like holy hell. But every year I had to charge that thing with more 22, you know. I did it myself, and I just kept that thing going every year, cooled like a champ. And I think finally the valves and stuff in the compressor were leaking, you know. I was kind of diagnosed, and I was like, okay, there's something more major than what I'm going to do, putting more refrigerant in it. It was, so I'm like, you know, after I'm estimated as like 45 years old, it's time to just
45
it's time
years.
to cut bait. But what I miss is the fact it took R22. I have a 30-pound cylinder of R22 that I bought years ago just for servicing that thing. And now it's like, you know, it's going to be the old 410A, so I don't have that. Hopefully it won't leak like the other one did. Is how much performance I'm going to get out of my evaporator. Maybe, I don't know. Like if I had an evaporator that I'm running R12 through it, and I'm getting, let's say, 20,000 BTUs out of it. Now I put 134A, with everything else being equal, am I still getting 20,000, or is it something a little more? Is it something a little less? Same way with YF, right? Is it a little more? Is it a little less? And so you're exactly right that heat of vaporization, because that's where the amount of energy it takes to boil off all that refrigerant. That's what the job of that evaporator is to boil that refrigerant, absorb the energy that it takes to boil that refrigerant. So if it takes more to boil off a particular refrigerant, it's actually going to do more for you. Okay? It takes more energy. It's going to take more energy out of the air, because once it's done boiling, it ain't hardly taking anything out of the air that's passing through it, right? Because it takes hardly any energy at all. Once it's a vaporized refrigerant, it hardly takes energy at all to start raising its temperature, right? So that's not desirable. That's where you're getting everything's so nice and cold. That's the whole benefit of a vapor compression refrigeration cycle. Your evaporator essentially runs at a constant temperature. You know, if it's running at 30 degrees, it's literally 30 degrees until that last little bit when the refrigerant's all boiled off and you get a little superheat. But you don't want a lot of superheat, because now, you know, it's not doing as much once it's superheated, you know. But if I got a refrigerant that takes more latent heat before it's boiled off, it's going to do more for me. It's going to absorb more energy. Okay, but there are other factors that go into that, because there's the whole aspect of, if I got now this is everything else being equal, I got the same compressor and everything. Well, I've got so much displacement, so much swept volume in a given compressor, and so now what's the specific volume of one, or density of that gas of one of these fluids? You know, they're all different. So that compressor might not pump as much refrigerant for one versus another because of the density of that refrigerant, right? So that plays into it as well. So where I learned the theoretical side of all that was thermodynamics. That's back to that, and then what happened, going back to my original discussion, what happens in graduate school is I took all kinds of graduate level courses where I now got a deeper, like in thermodynamics, I'd have a segment where we'd look at air conditioning, refrigeration cycle, but then I get to graduate school, I took an entire class on air conditioning. So now I expand on that subject. In thermodynamics, I learned about power cycles, for just an IC engine, like a gas or a diesel powered cycle, right, on a car engine type. But then I go to graduate school, and you took a whole course was nothing but IC engines. So that's the difference. Now you take in graduate school, you just exacerbate that. You just really expose it into a much deeper understanding. You start applying that a bit more. Of course, then you get into a career like I had at Caterpillar, and now you actually visualize, because, well, it depends what your career allows you to do, but in my career it allowed me to actually touch and feel and actually experiment with air conditioning systems, refrigeration systems. And so now, and that really got to a deeper level of understanding. Yeah, I had several jobs, like you said, before I had my career and graduated from university, but some of the summers I'd work for my dad, like you say, and eventually a more steady job was working at a golf course. And that took me through a lot of my high school years and early college. I was doing that, both in the pro shop or out on the course, working in the maintenance department. So that got me working with my hands, which I found I enjoyed doing a lot, fixing things and stuff. I don't know. I've always had all kinds of odds and ends of jobs. I mean, all through raising kids and working at Caterpillar, or at least earlier in my career, at times I had 2 part-time jobs. With I got asked to come back to Bradley University to teach thermodynamics, and so there's actually 2 levels of thermodynamics. Usually I taught the first entry-level one, but I did teach the thermal dynamics, the second course that engineers would take. I had taught that one as well, and then I did teach the graduate level course in air conditioning one semester as well. But most of the time I taught the entry-level thermodynamics class. I lose count how many times I had done that, but it's between all 3 courses I probably taught 10, 12 times at Bradley. So that's something you want to learn a subject matter, because there's things I walked out of school that some of the real deep understanding of certain subjects was still. Your confidence isn't there. I guess that's a better way to put it. Your confidence isn't there. And when you start teaching it and you start getting questions about it, and the first thing I said I was going to do is, if I don't know an answer, I'm going to tell my students. I'm not going to BS my way through this. I don't want to be that guy. I'm not going to falsify or kid. But I always said, I don't know the answer, but I'm gonna study it and find out, and I'll report. And I did, and I'd come back to class, and I'd learn about it, and I'd come back and tell them what I found out, And then the great thing about it is I learned something too, right? So I always enjoyed that. The other job I had was kind of unrelated. So earlier, my grandfather asked me to help for part-time work to run water treatment tests. He owned a small water utility, both drinking water and wastewater. Now, the part where I actually ran tests was for the wastewater facility. And so you'd have to run tests, and then you'd have to do the forms and send to the state once a month. So I was doing those for him. That was like 25 years I did that. But yeah, I always kept busy doing something. Now I got just one job. I just work at Caterpillar. But right out of school, my first job was working at Caterpillar. They were interviewing on campus. I can tell you, getting my master's degree, I can't say my undergraduate GPA was the greatest of the greatest, but my graduate GPA, I forget what I was, like a 3.6 or something like that on a 4-point scale, so it was pretty good, I think. And that's what got my foot in the door for an interview with Caterpillar, because it was like, I think if you were under a 3.0, they weren't even going to look, at least back in that time, they certainly wouldn't. And so that got, at any rate, so a lot of people would go through an engineer training program, so they'd have a rotational thing. But in my case, I got hired in as a direct hire, and I was in one of the buildings at the technical center. Now, to explain the technical center, it's set up kind of like a college campus, and especially back in that day, in fact, the building that I went to was all engine testing, predominantly. Revolved around engines. And then the building next door was electrical. That's where all the electrical engineering was at, and another building was transmissions, and so I got brought in to be a test engineer for engines. And I did that. I think I had 2.5 years on that or so. And then a job opened up in this group that did the cooling systems testing, and they did cooling systems tests on the engines and the complete vehicles. They bring vehicles into a test lab, and put a dyno on them and things like that, and run cooling tests. And one person on that group was responsible for doing the HVAC testing. And the guy that was doing that was moving on. He had been doing it, and it was time for him to transition to something they needed somebody to do. And hey Dan, would you be, usually they ask you if you'd be, I got an opportunity for you, but it was very suggested you take that opportunity, right? So I took it, and that's where I got into air conditioning at Caterpillar. And I did that. Boy, it was like 3.5, 4 years, something like that. So that's where I got my hands-on experience with air conditioning in those years, doing the test lab. Nothing production. No. No, this was all test engineer. So our role, there was another separate group that did the HVAC design work. But back in that time period, the testing was kept separate from the designing groups. Well, that kind of had an accountability factor to it. If you're over here and I'm doing the design work, but I'm also testing it, right? So you keep it separate, and so the testing group would have the requirements of what they're being tested to and whatever, and it was kind of a check and a balance, right? And so the design team's not going to tell the test team, hey, I pass, I don't care what no, it's yours. And the testing guy's name's on the line, his reputation's on the line, so you're not going to okay something just because the design guy told you so, because you're making his life bad because it didn't pass, right? So, it kind of had an accountability to it.
Right.
That was the thought, at least back in that day. So the two entities were kind of kept separate back then. But yeah,
are they more joined together now?
Yeah, we're joined together now. Well, we really don't have. Actually, Gerald Morris, who you met, he does a test engineer role in our organization. So our organization's a design group, but a lot of the testing we rely on our suppliers to do for the HVAC nowadays. But the expertise of how we want those conducted and developing and continually enhancing those standards or those procedures, we write those up in-house, and somebody with knowledge and experience who's done it for many years, like Gerald, does that. And sometimes we get together as a team. With my background, I'll add to that as well. We'll participate together on those. But no formal training on how to, my training on specific to air conditioning was my predecessor. And we had some documentation on how to conduct the test, but not like we do. That's something in my tenure that we've enhanced considerably, writing down documented procedures on how to run all the various types of testing that we do for HVAC. Back then, we didn't have so much, but that would have been something to rely on as well, is the documentation, but definitely the guy who trained me. Back in that time, there was a little bit of a mix of assembling our own. I can think of the track-type tractors back in that day. Had a platform. The cab was really just a shell that plopped down on this platform, and so the real working guts of that cab, if you will, was all on that platform. And right in front of, it depends which model of track type we're talking about, but more of what I call the mid-size, like your D6s and such. But those ones had this platform that the metal work of that kind of formed like the drain pan and everything, and the coils would plop down. Whether it was we did the assembly on that in-house or a sub-assembler of that platform down the road did it, but the coils would plop in there, and the blowers. The blower came in as a package now, but it was all metal. It wasn't like these plastic ones you see today. It was today would be very expensive because it was a metal housing blowers with wheels that got attached to motors and got and all the wiring on it and everything. Oh yeah. Now I say that back then we also had conditioner groups that we would buy. Now that's just the HVAC unit box, that had the the heater and evaporator coils and such that bolted to the cab. We had quite a few of those though as well back in that time. I'd say that's maybe just before my tenure is probably where we started transitioning more towards having conditioner groups. So when I came in, it was probably a mix of both. But other than like that track type that had legacy for several years, even after I hired in, it stayed that way for a while until it finally got updated and out, got away from that. There wasn't anything brand new that was coming up that was still like that when I was starting my career. Anything new was pretty much going to a dedicated conditioner group. And of course now, you don't, we've gotten completely out of, separate blower motors that you got to put the wheels on the shafts, and, install those, and mount them and align the housings and all, none of that. Everything's a pre-packaged blower unit that everything's all balanced and got the housing, you just bolt it on there. It comes from a supplier that does all that and has it all balanced and and then it's more cost effective. Actually, it's better quality, to be honest. We tend to not go out to a supplier and say, hey, design up our entire system. We kind of tend to control that in-house, what the system's going to be like. That's what we consider our wheelhouse is to, instead of focusing, in fact, that's something I did within the company. The people within my own cab organization used to have a mindset that HVAC box unit that bolts to the cab, like that's everything about the HVAC. Nay, that is not everything about the HVAC. And it's just all a bunch of PF stuff all you guys do. Well, that's somewhat true. A lot of the stuff we get is PF'd, purchase finished. I gotta watch my acronyms. But the thing that we bring to the table, and what I got my own management to understand, what the expertise is of our team is being systems knowledge experts, subject matter experts on that whole system, because there's actual several subsystems that they have to be knowledgeable on. You can't design a complete HVAC system and not know something about the coolant system on that vehicle you're going to be tapping into for heating. And you got a condenser that's part of the engine cooling package out on the front radiator. And you have to interact with the team that designs that and works with that cooling package, because the airflow that's going to get is critical, right? And somebody else is mounting a compressor to an engine, and then there's the electrical system, and now you're dealing with software, and then there's the air handling system. You don't always get to control it right there at the HVAC unit with the air flow into the cab, the fresh air stream and the return air path. So you got to understand something about those, and the filtration systems, right? In the environments we work in, air quality is critical. And so controlling that and understanding the pressurization of the cab is critical, right? So there's a lot, and so that's the expertise that the engineers in our group bring to the party, is you have individuals that are the experts within our company that have all the knowledge and expertise on all those combined together, and that's what forms a workable HVAC system on a piece of construction equipment.
Do you have patents?
I do.
Do you know how many?
You're not me personally. I don't,
Yeah.
I have 4 patents, I believe. Yeah.
Are you allowed to talk about what they're? Are you allowed to talk about them, or are they proprietary? Or
well, they're patents, so you're protected by them. It's hard to remember.
I know, but some people don't.
They get kind of quirky, because some of them, I got to be honest, when you do a patent, you have a new design on something, and you have almost like a brainstorming session on, so you're throwing out ideas galore on these things. But one of them I actually did with Gerald Morris, who you met, sits on the ASAE committee, and it's a device that we came up with to measure the airflow, the fresh airflow into a tractor cab, because it can be kind of difficult if you go put a flow measuring device right up against the fresh air intake system. It immediately puts a restriction on it, and it screws up the balance. So we came up with a device that alleviates that pressure imbalance and allows you to get a reading on your flow meter going into the cab. It's really more of a test device, really, that we came up with for testing our cabs for developmental purposes. Yeah, I know we had another one with a fan control for the fresh air going into a cab. So the cab pressure is a big deal for us, as you can imagine, and controlling the fresh air amount into the cab. So I want to have a minimum amount of cabin pressure, and that keeps the dust out. Well, as my filter starts to maybe plug up a little bit, or the seals on the cab start getting a little bit worn away, it takes more fresh air pumped into that cab to get to the pressure that you want to keep the dust out. So what if I had a blower system that would dial itself up a little bit to overcome some of the filter getting plugged or seals leaking or whatever. And so you got to monitor that, because I don't want it to, the other thing I don't want to have happen is get excessive amounts of fresh air, because you might say, well, heck, just dial the thing up a lot more all the time. Well, now I'm bringing in major quantities of fresh air. Imagine, a lot about automotive systems. Imagine if they had, and I'm going to date myself, but you had the old normal mode on your little slider bars. Well, normal AC mode brought in gobs of fresh air. Why did you go to MACS AC mode? Well, that shut off a lot of the fresh air flow, and it made the air temp coming out of the registers a lot colder, because you weren't bringing in gobs of hot, humid, fresh air, right? So same deal here. I don't want to bring in too much fresh air, because then it works my AC too hard, and it doesn't get as cold and comfortable in the cab for the operator. But unlike automotive, we can't go down to the minimal levels that they might, like a recirc mode. We got to always have some amount of fresh air. But that was a real interesting one when we started toying around with ideas on how we might do that. There was a team of us, and I guess the funnest thing about it is it's one of those things you kind of puts a nice little exclamation point on your career, when you have a patent. It does wind up just being a plaque to hang on the wall, but it gives you a sense of pride. My family, half the time, they don't even hardly understand or know what I do, but I bring something like that home, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, cool, he's actually doing something here, in his career that I don't know anything about or understand, right? So it's probably as much more of a sense of pride to show them than anything. I did with SAE a little bit, yeah. But as far as an organization that I've been deeply involved with, it's definitely been MACS. But when you say that, I think what I did early on when I was involved with air conditioning with Caterpillar, I did go to one or two of the conferences for IMACA. So I was around when that was still a thing. And I had gone to MACS as well. And I can't remember how I got asked or invited to make a talk at the MACS conference. I can't remember how that came about. And I can't remember the exact year. The only thing I can remember is it was in New Orleans. And it was in the 90s, like I want to say like 97 or 8 time period. So if you look at the history of whenever MACS was in New Orleans in the later 90s, that would I think it was like the first time they were in New Orleans, I think. But that was my first one. And I can't remember if I came back the next year on top of that. I know in the early years we might have, in my group, we used to kind of revolve around who was going to do it in my team at that time. So there might have been a couple other folks that did it a time or two. Plus, and it's hard for me to pinpoint, because a lot of my early ones, we did them on slides, the transparencies. And I don't have those anymore, they're not even on the computer or anything anymore. But then, I think I was just looking at it, going to about 2005 to today. I mean, I haven't hardly missed a one. I mean, there was a year or two or whatever, you didn't have the heavy duty, I didn't go that time. Otherwise, I've been like every year, they invite me back, so that's kind of a privilege and an honor. So yeah, that's how it started, and it was in the late 90s there, and that's when I really got into coming to this thing. That was the start of it, and then somewhere in the early 2000s, it was like every year, just bam, bam, bam. I had a boss at that time too. They were grooming. So now at this point in time in my career, I was an air conditioning test guy. Then I went back to engines. Kind of the thing at CAT, a company like that, you always felt like, well, I got to keep moving around if I'm going to keep moving up the ladder. I can't. Especially young in your earlier years, you don't want to stagnate in one spot, for too long, so I went back to engines, and then a job. And one of the things that was always, hey, you ought to have a design experience at some point in your career, and a job opened up in the group that I used to do the testing for, the HVAC design group. They were actually part of an entire cab group. Actually, they were a subset of that. But they were looking for somebody to be an HVAC designer person and so then that's when I joined their group, and that's kind of where I've been ever since. I'm actually the oldest member of the guy who's still in that group. But in the early 2000s, my boss that was in that group, they were kind of grooming me to be a technical expert in HVAC. You know, we call them like an engineering specialist. You go and you promote from being a design engineer to a first, a specialist, and then a senior specialist, and then, you eventually, you make technical steward. And that's eventually what I evolved to, is to become a technical steward in HVAC. But part of that procession is, he's like, I think one of the roles for, a guy on this path to eventually be a technical steward would be to go speak at this conference every year. So that was an expectation that I was going to come and speak at MACS every year. So not only was MACS asking me, but I had my boss pushing me to come to MACS as well to speak. Which was great, having support from my superiors. I had a few instances when I had a little bit of a struggle with getting some support internally, but most of the years it was like a no-brainer to my bosses. They looked at it as a way for bettering myself, even, because it goes back to what I told you when I was a teacher of thermodynamics. I'm going to go and then teach here at MACS. Well, by creating a topic that I'm going to talk about, I all of a sudden learn more about that subject as well, because I'm not going to stand up there and talk about something I don't know about, right? So you learn something about that. And what you learn speaking to people after you've gone up and talked, and you have guys that service the equipment, and they ask you questions, and they want to learn more. Now you're learning and talking to them, right? So that was another thing I always look forward to coming here. There's a dealer service network, yeah. Earlier in my career, that was a sub part of our cab team, and it's usually through the communicators at the dealer. So the technicians usually themselves didn't call. They had a communicator at their dealer because they might have all kinds of irons in the fire on things they're working on. And so they had somebody that was more their full-time job to make all these phone calls to get the questions asked, right? But the point is, they could get to our service engineers in our group, and then when they couldn't, the real easy run-of-the-mills thing they would handle, especially as they became somewhat knowledgeable. They had to do all kinds of stuff, cab. It wasn't just HVAC. But when you got into some of the things that they didn't understand, about the systems, and then it's like, okay, and then they'd start asking us about it. That has since moved to a more centralized group that does that within the company, and so then they tend to answer those questions, and then only if they get into something, I'll get an email. They get something that they don't know the answer to, and then I just had one the other day, was about a particular a blower, actually. And they were trying to service one blower with this other motor, and they couldn't figure it out. So, needed somebody with some technical background. Now, sometimes via MACS or something, coming to the conference, and you get, usually, I don't get too many from the aftermarket type folks at MACS, emails wise, even if I've had communication with them. But they do, cat dealers send folks here. And so then I've made relationships with some of them, and then I'll get questions from them. Actually, I say that, though, and there was a gentleman I can't remember his name off the top of my head. I'd have to, but he was in Wisconsin, and it was like I think it was like his brother's business, though, but he did a lot of HVAC service work. And a few years, I started corresponding with him via email, because he had a few things that was a trouble spot for him, and I was helping him. He was emailing me so I could help him. So so there's a few times when I've had some direct correspondence, but it's a lot of times when I've had that, it's been because of MACS. Oh, I do, but you have to understand, we're empty nesters now. So spare time now is, enjoy, if my grandson comes over, for a night or something. But usually I like to fix and tinker things. We have a place up in Wisconsin, so we like to snowmobile. I like to get my wife and I, as much as we possibly can, go up there for long weekends. And when you have another home, there's always something to be maintained, and that place happens to have a pretty sizable yard too. So you go up at certain times, and there's plenty of grass to mow and things like that. I know it doesn't sound like a lot of fun, but that's the way I like to get exercise. I like to do something that's, I'm outdoors and enjoying life like that. Fishing, when we're on a lake, we go fishing. I like to do that. I got 2 dogs that are high energy dogs. I like to play outdoors with them a lot. I got these little frisbees that are real soft and flexible, but you can still toss them pretty far. And the one dog in particular is an Australian Shepherd, so she actually leaps up in the air to grab it out of the air, So, and then you get them in the snow. So I don't mind cold weather, within reason. So we play in the snow a lot with the dogs love it. So I'm outside wrestling with them in the snow. I don't know. I like fixing stuff. So snowmobiles. I got older snowmobiles. There's always something broken on a snowmobile. So I got one right now. I got it tore down. Trying to pinpoint a fuel leak in the fuel system. I think it's the carburetor float. So I've been chipping away at that. Actually, as it turns out, I think the damn thing had 3 different separate leaks on the carburetors, and I keep thinking I got it resolved, and then another one, with replacing the seals. I should have just got a complete kit of new seals, because I think what happened is somebody who had it prior to me flushed it with stuff that the seals didn't like. Yep. Oh yeah, that whole area is known for snowmobiling in the winter, and they
What
take
part
a lot
of Wisconsin? Like western Wisconsin or
northwestern.
Northwestern.
Top of the county is Lake Superior. It borders Lake Superior.
Wow.
Yeah, it's way up there.
Yeah, I've been to the UP, and I've been up to.
Well, that's just due east of where we're at.
Yeah.
The UP probably goes a little further north than where we're at, the way it's shaped, over there. But the UP is basically due east from where we're at. That's big time snowmobiling too in the wintertime. The UP, we've got about I don't know, there's probably like 2.5 foot of snow on the ground right now up there. Wow. And they got trail systems through the woods. They groom the trails and everything. I mean, it's like a super highway through these woods. A lot of that in the summertime, people now not necessarily on the snowmobile trails. In fact, a lot of those are gated, so in the off season you can't even get to them. There's a gate there because they're going across private property. A lot of them in different places, But they do have places you can go, and they got mountain bike trails. People go out their mountain bikes out in the woods, with those. That's a little too strenuous for me. Cross country skiing is popular. In fact, a very popular race in North America is the American Birkebeiner. Is later this month. It might be this weekend, as a matter of fact. I mean,
it's done up there?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It draws. Oh my gosh, it must draw 10,000 people that race. 10,000. I don't know. It's a lot. Well, certainly, you answered part of it in a way, but just giving me ideas was the electrification, right? We're always kind of a little bit behind automotive, if you will. They're the ones that are leading the way. And then a lot of the things you'll see pop up, maybe even on highway truck, before it finally comes down, that we start picking up on it. But, I hate saying it like this, but everything gets measured by cost, and so, even though we could or want to do it, or, it's having an all electric type HVAC, if somebody's looking at it, well, that's going to add, $500 or whatever it is to the cost of the system. Well, there's got to be some kind of benefit that offsets that somewhere, that, because, Caterpillar, obviously, they're in the business to make money. You got to figure out, is that what customers want? My God, is that a feature I can sell, right? So that, it's a balancing act. But, as far as electrification, a lot of what's driving some of that is getting into idle off. The size of the big diesel engines, idling. There are some places that are, regulating idling of the big engines.
The construction equipment.
Yeah. For excessive idling, so that's part of it. But you have certain customers that recognize, because you got some that are run big organizations, and they're pretty savvy when they know how they can save dollars on something, and it's, hey, if that's not idling, then I'm not paying the fuel cost, just idling, and so that drives a lot of that too. And so then you have customers that really weigh the benefit. They've got a affordability they would have on a system to maybe pay extra, because it does cost more. I mean, let's be honest about it. I got to put in batteries or however I'm driving it, and have some way I can drive this thing when it's idling. It's not running the engine. On a lot of our equipment, we have tended not to have a lot of the mode controls and things like that. Honestly, our excavators do, but they're kind of the design center for those is in Japan. So need I say more? I mean, those usually have all the bells and whistles because of where they're coming from. That's kind of the way things have historically been with excavators. But the other systems tend to be pretty simple systems. They don't really have a lot of mode control in them. So I see us going more into that, more devices to control and improve air quality in the cabs. We've got a whole range of powered pre-cleaning equipment, and I think you're going to see that grow in usage on more and more pieces of equipment in the years to come. I'm trying to think if we have anything now where it's standard. I do know the real high efficiency filters are standard on some machines, and so it's a non-powered version of that unit is definitely standard. But the take rate on those on some machines is actually surprisingly very high. I mean, you get some machines, they'll be 50%. They'll take these powered units, and it's not really that bad of a cost adder anyway. I mean, if you're buying a $1 million mining truck, what's another $1,000 or something for something? And that's one of the industries where they're very heavily regulated for air quality for the operators, is in mining. So that's where a lot of that's being driven from, and it's trickling down into construction. And there's an operator inside that machine, and so the cab has to protect them, and that's why there ain't no roll the windows down because I'm getting hot. You gotta, and that's where idle off can become so danged important. It ain't a matter of, just shut the engine off and roll down the window or something. No, you can't do that, and I can't just shut it off and have it off. And run the blower. Well, and out there how hot it would get if you didn't have air conditioning when you shut it off. So, you're trying to protect the operator. So you got to have conditioned air. And so air conditioning, and then you got to filter the air and keep the cab pressurized. It's really a safety element for the operator. So when you're going to save the fuel, that's fine, but you gotta have a way to keep the operator safe at the same time. There is a difference. It depends on the soil you're working in. Regular old dirt or something.
Regular old dirt.
Anything that's in heavy enough amounts, I guess, breathing all day isn't the best thing for you. But it's where you got the silica, so it's like the sand and gravel type stuff. And so when you get out west like you're going, and all that rock and all that, and that's what gets those really small particles in that silica, and that's the stuff that gets down deep into your lung tissue. Like the bigger particles that you normally have, it depends what kind of stuff you were talking about. But what I call just regular dirt and stuff is usually bigger particles, and your body's got a natural mechanism to eventually expel that, right? But it's that silica that it gets that really fine stuff, and it gets into the deep tissue of your lungs, and your body's got no mechanism. Once it's there for life. It doesn't have a mechanism to get rid of it, and that's what causes some people to get COPD. I'm not saying that's always why somebody has COPD, but it can be something that leads to people getting COPD, for sure.
Do what you can now to protect it from happening
Well, and that's where you see very particular regulations for mines that regulate a miner's exposure to silica and respirable dust, they call it.
Right. That was
Yep.
in the papers.
Yep,
Yeah.
yep, yep. For me personally, what brings me here, besides somebody asking me to give a talk, but you know, I'm to the point now. I've done it so many times. The nervous butterflies, way back when were like this. Now it's about maybe about that much. By the time I walk up on the stage, they're gone. Because I've just done it so many times. And then the thing is, it's almost like a family reunion. I sometimes say that when I go up to talk. So there's people that I only get to see at MACS once a year. And so it's kind of a time to get together with old acquaintances and see how they're doing, talk to them. Even some of the suppliers that I work with on a regular basis, but it's always work related all the time. And not that we don't have a little bit of that dialogue going on here, but it's usually a little more relaxed. So you actually get to, be more personal and be real people and get to know people for who they are. So I like that part about it. I enjoy the training sessions as much as I can. I like to look out and find training sessions. I don't know how many times I've gone and listened to Gene Dianetti talk about TXVs, and if they're doing it again, I'll probably go sit in on it again because I learn something new every time about it and just reinforce my own knowledge on them. Right, because those are always kind of a strange device anyway, aren't they? Trying to figure out what makes them things tick. So, it's always fun to learn about that stuff. People, when you have any of the component suppliers come in, compressors, and they talk about compressor failure modes and how what causes them, and somebody talking about the hoses and the moisture ingression and the leak rates and all the different things, or they got new technologies for how to do a quick and easy connection there and how it's leak proof and all that stuff. So I try and come to learning sessions too. So I always enjoyed that. As far as evolving on the off highway, I guess it's a matter of MACS doing what I've gradually seen it doing over the years, and that's try and guide. How we have several of us OEMs and some of our suppliers here, and some of us together form an SAE tech committee that writes standards and stuff. And I've seen MACS bring opportunities to us where they see gaps that we could work on together, because it's like they can't, we need that guidance to see what maybe is a gap that we're missing out on. And so MACS comes in there and Elvis did that 3 years ago with this whole thing with the nitrogen and the having some kind of thing to guide for field service, right, that we were talking about earlier today. And so I'd like to see more of that, but I've definitely have seen more partnering like that between the two organizations on the technical side. Me as a company, but me as a SAE member, and working together with MACS, just like the relationship that has existed for years with automotive. And I've been seeing that develop, maybe not to the level that the automotive has gotten to, but I see that continuing to grow, and I think we need to keep growing that like we have been. Yeah, I remember I think it was probably the first time we had a meeting that was MACS and people from the off-highway industry, and Gordon Marks was kind of leading that charge at the time. And it didn't quite go anywhere initially on that go around, right? But there was kind of an open-ended discussion kind of thing. But it set the groundwork, and that's kind of where I'm saying I've watched this over the years start out with a meeting, but eventually it's gotten to the point where MACS and here the technical community, and we're working together on standards, right? And I know we have more gaps in what we've done as an SAE tech committee. We need you guys to keep pushing us because we're slow. We're a bunch of engineers, and we can't make a damn decision sometimes, and move on that stuff. So it helps. It helps when you guys come in and help facilitate us a little bit, and tell us some directions. Maybe you see a gap that maybe we're missing something.